We now get to the central toledoth, or this is the account of, in Genesis, the story of Abraham. I'm sorry we've had to bypass some wonderful stories of Noah and his 40-day storm in the ark. By the way, there's another good number. The number 40 in the Bible is always a number of testing. 40 days of rain. There'll be 40 years that Israel wanders in the desert. There'll be 40 days that Jesus is tempted. So we can add that to our list of numbers if you want. 6, imperfect. 7, perfect. 10, completion of things. 12, completion of people. And now 40, the number of testing. But we get to about Genesis 12. And the needle kind of drops onto a man way north in the region of Chaldea. For all my Chaldean students, this is where you come from too, the modern day land of Iraq, Persia, near the Tigris and Euphrates, a man named Av. We're told that Av was a very wealthy man, implicitly, because he has a father and a brother and many herds and flocks. Those are all descriptors of a very rich man in the Old Testament. The only issue is his wife, whose name's Sarai, S-A-R-A-I, which means barren. So though he's a very wealthy man, he has no sons or children. And God comes to him. Remember, in the Bible, God always initiates. It's one of the messages of Christianity. And says, Av, I need you to up and move and go to the new land I'm showing you. And Av, out of faith, follows and believes. He gets to this new land with his father and brother and herds and flocks and his wife named Sarai. And God says, here in this region of Canaan, I give you a new name. Your name is Abram, which means father of a nation, because I have chosen you to be the father of my people. You, Abram, and Sarai, you're going to have more descendants than the stars of the heaven and the sands on the seashore. Well, Abram and Sarah are left alone in a new country, new language. They believe the promise of God, but really nothing is happening. And so one day, Sarai, remember, this is her idea, as you'll read, comes to Abram and says, well, maybe what this God meant for us to have children is that I can give you our housekeeper, our maidservant. Her name is Hagar. I'll let you sleep with her, and maybe you will have a son through her. Maybe that's what God meant. And so Abram, who's a very old man, about 75, 80 years old, Sarah, only about 10 years younger, they finally have a son through his handmaid Hagar, and they name him Ishmael, and all's happy. But then you'll read that one day some visitants came, 3 of them, from a foreign land, who were later identified as angels, and they say to Abram, hey Abram, when God said that he was going to bless you and Sarai, he meant you and Sarai are going to have a son. In fact, by the time we come back in a year, she will have given birth. And Sarai hears this and she laughs, an 80, 90-year-old woman. And they said, and by the way, we're going to change your name a 3rd time. It's no longer Av, it's not Abram, but it's Abraham, which in Hebrew, that Ham is an intensifier. You're going to be the father of a mob, a riot. And Sarai is no longer Sarai, because she won't be barren anymore. Her name now is Sarah, which means princess. She's going to be the princess of this new nation. And as you'll read, sure enough, God blessed them with a son, and they named him, we laughed, or Isaac. Now we get the story of Hagar and Ishmael. Remember them? And now Sarah comes with her own son. And remember whose idea it was? Sarai's. You got to laugh at this. Now she comes back to Abraham and says, hey, this dumb idea of yours to have a son through Hagar, I don't like it anymore. I want him out of here. So Hagar and Ishmael are banished. They end up in the Arabian Peninsula, and their descendants will come back in the story. Just hang on. But meanwhile, now we're left, as the story goes on, with Abraham, Sarah, and Isaac. Now we get to the most pivotal story. Isaac is about 18 years old, and God comes back to Abraham and says, hey, Abraham, I need you to sacrifice the son, Isaac, for me. And as you read the story, if any of you have any cursory knowledge of the Christian story, even then you'll see some great foreshadowing here. The father is asked to sacrifice his son. They take a 3-day journey. The son climbs up a mountain. The son carries the wood on his back. You'll read that. And the son is to be the sacrifice. Even with any sort of knowledge of Christianity, you all know who that sounds like, right? Jesus. And that's exactly how the story is told. Abraham and Isaac get up there. It's very detailed, which is a way the writer telling us this is something really important. He didn't skip any detail. We're told of the knife, the flint, the wood, the journey, where the servants were, the whole thing. They get to the top of this mountain. They build an altar. Only then and only then, apparently, does Isaac say, hey, Dad, we remembered the wood, the flint, the rope, the knife. We got here, the map. Seems like we forgot the sacrifice. And apparently at that time, Abraham, a very old man, 110, asked his son to get up on the altar. And I find this very fascinating. The text said he does. How easy would it have been for Isaac to outrun a 110-year-old man after a 3 days hike up a mountain? But apparently, according to the text, Isaac was obedient. And then when God sees, I think, both the obedience of Isaac and Abraham, he says, okay, I see your faith. So now I will allow a substitution to be made for he who should have been sacrificed. Look there in the thicket, you'll find a ram. You can sacrifice him instead. And for those of you that know the Christian story, of course, that too, a Christian would say, is a foreshadow of the Jesus story. That we who should have been sacrificed for our sin, remember Genesis 3, yet God allows a substitution to be made and place that on Jesus instead. Well, Isaac goes home by another way, you think. And the story then will go on that, sure enough, through Isaac, the descendants of Abraham will be blessed. It becomes the nation of Israel, which now will be the center family of the Old Testament story as we go forward. But this wonderful toledoth of Abraham, because you see, from this, that place where Isaac was almost sacrificed and the Lord provided, was named Moriah. Moriah is a Hebrew word, the Lord will provide. Because on that mountain, the Lord provided a sacrifice, a substitutionary sacrifice, the ram, for he who should have been sacrificed. Why do I mention Mount Moriah? Because later, when that family of Abraham became a nation, and they wanted a capital city, like all other cities, well, what would be their most holy spot that they would want to centralize? Well, Mount Moriah. And they built walls around it. And they called it Jerusalem. And later, when one of those descendants wanted to build a temple for God, what would be the most holy spot within those walls? The top of Mount Moriah. And that's where Solomon built the temple. So it becomes a very holy spot for the Jews of the Old Testament. This is the spot where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac. Well, if you fast forward the story and go to the New Testament, the birth of Jesus, who Christians believe is the Old Testament fulfillment of the Messiah, Jesus then, when he went to be sacrificed, now did not get crucified on the top of Mount Moriah, because then it was inside the city walls of Jerusalem, and the Romans didn't do any executions inside the walls. But instead, Jesus went to a hill right outside of Jerusalem, very near Mount Moriah, and was sacrificed after a 3-day journey, carrying the wood on his back. And the Father would sacrifice the Son. But a Christian believes that after Jesus died and was resurrected, he ascended again to heaven, and then the scripture is clear that he ascended from the top of Mount Moriah. So now Mount Moriah becomes a holy place for Christians. Now remember when I said Hagar and Ishmael went to the Arabian Peninsula and their descendants would come back into the story? Well, here we go. About 571 years after the birth of Jesus, we have the birth of Abdullah Muhammad from that line of Hagar and Ishmael. We know that today as the modern religion of Islam. Islam believes, and we'll get to this later in more specificity, but for today we can just say that Islam believes that the Prophet received his greatest revelation from the top of Mount Moriah, the 5 pillars or tenets or foundation of Islam. And so now the top of Mount Moriah becomes a holy spot for Islam. Today that holy spot belongs to Muslims. It's a mosque, the Dome of the Rock. In 1952, after World War II, Prince Abdullah of Jordan gave enough money that the whole dome could be gilded in gold. You can't miss it when you go to Jerusalem. In the Palestinian sun, this huge golden dome. It's the top of Mount Moriah. And the modern day compromise for the 3 faiths who claim that as a holy site, all from Abraham, you see, the father of 3 monotheistic faiths in order: Judaism, Christianity, Islam. Today, if you go to Jerusalem, the top belongs to the Islam faith. Only males with head covered may go into it from a north entrance. Jews go through a south sidewalk to get to what few remaining stones remain of Solomon's temple. It's called the Wailing Wall. And Christians, they got the spot not on Mount Moriah, but just a couple blocks away, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, a church built over the supposed site of Jesus' tomb. And this is how the League of Nations, then the United Nations, tried to solve this problem after World War II of how 3 monotheistic faiths, all from Abraham, all wanting the same spot, were supposed to live in peace with this compromise. And I'll let you be the judge of how well that has worked. But that's modern day Mount Moriah, is the Temple of the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. It's incredible. You can still go there, the place that the Lord provided. That has been my brief explanation of this central toledoth of the story of Genesis. I hope it helped you unpack it and that you'll be very excited to read it. It's an important story because Abraham, for the 3rd time, is the father of 3 monotheistic faiths in order: Judaism, Christianity, Islam. We learned new vocabulary words like Abram, father of a nation; Sarai, barren; Sarah, princess; Isaac, we laughed. And all of this illustrates again that God initiates a relationship with humanity and will not let go. The Lord provides. And all of this continues to foreshadow the story, even as it tells it, of God's rescue plan following the fall of Genesis 3. Unfortunately, we have to leave Genesis. All the stories are equally as rich. I so wish I could tell you the story of Jacob and Joseph. We just can't, and I'm so sorry. But I hope I piqued your interest that you could read it on your own. The next video then will leave this and talk about the 2nd book of the Bible in just one lecture, the book of Exodus. I'll see you then.